Welcome to the Report, where we watch and talk about every episode of the Colbert Report from 2005 to 2014. That's a lot of episodes. I'm Nathaniel.
I'm Alex.
And Colbert's guest is Richard Preston.
Yeah. Richard Preston wrote, I guess, a famous book about Ebola called The Hot Zone, but it was from 1994. So I think they only had him on because they were worried about the avian flu, so I guess they thought he would be a guest that would make sense.
So Ebola's been around since the 90s?
Yeah.
Okay.
I remember one of the Simpsons prediction memes had a picture of a book. It was Curious George and the Ebola virus. They say, I guess people didn't realize that I guess somehow this is a prediction despite Ebola having been a thing. The joke being that they would test it on monkeys. So.
Yep.
So what they're going to talk about is Canada's government following in a vote, not
obviously.
I mean, who knows? Maybe they're.
Well, I mean, I think us living now
would have probably remembered a military coup in Canada.
Yeah. Or total collapse.
And for the truth segment, he turns off the lights and uses a flashlight to talk about
because he's
I mean, it's not Halloween, but maybe it would have been better then, but still good.
Yep.
And so the first segment, I thought this was going to be a better known district about Duke Cunningham, and it would just be unfortunately aged because Duke Cunningham resigned due to being corrupt, but no, it was just a joke because Duke Cunningham the day before had resigned after pleading guilty
to corruption charges.
How
much money was it?
It was
$1.2 million.
I think that was a Canadian riddle. I'll show you then I had the picture of the itemized. Yeah, here's the itemized list of money he was asking for.
Why make an itemized list?
I don't know. I mean, to be fair, it's vague enough that I guess you could deny it if it wasn't obvious that
it was on a notepad.
Yeah, and as you can see, it's his notepad, so there's no denying that it was him. So
yeah, it's not very smart. I
mean, to be fair, maybe it was supposed to be so that they would know it was from him, but
yeah.
So they didn't know they were paying for nothing, and so Colbert says that we had great footage. We were going to play instead of the baby panda at the National Zoo. It was Tyshawn, who was born that year.
Which they do play.
Yeah, it was the first baby panda at the National Zoo, so.
No, I was trying to...
Or at least that survived.
I was trying to take any of the pandas back.
I know, Tyshawn, I think they only let him stay for 5 years, but I think the parents are there permanently, but...
Yeah, and if there's been another panda baby in the...
There have been.
Zoo since? Okay.
Yeah, I remember one of my classmates was really into that, but...
Yeah.
Probably that. Colbert claims that he's not scared of pandas because they're not really bears and that they're closer to possums. What this is based on is that because of the resemblance between the giant panda and the red panda, many people assumed that giant pandas were not actual bears and were instead related to the red pandas and raccoons.
But they are actual bears?
They are actual bears. Then they're not related to possums, who are marsupials at all.
What kind of bear are they closest to?
I'm not sure. Maybe.
Sun bears, maybe?
Yeah, I don't know. And so, at the press conference, Duke Cunningham was crying pretty hard. But it seems like they probably don't do that anymore. I mean, I'm not sure if that's as smart or not. And so it talks about, says, oh, Dukey, oh, Dukester. Dukester was the name of the yacht that they gave him.
Yeah, that's not even... Again, it seems like he's trying to get cut.
Yeah. But too, this was also around the time they had, Jack Abramoff was the lobbyist who was caught and I think, started releasing details about their lobbying about the legal gifts that he had given. So imagine that's part of the reason that Duke Cunningham got caught. That he lists all the things that he got, but says that he's a Republican. So
yeah, so he's just good with money.
Yeah. I mean, he's from. Oh yeah, that's why he says. Oh, he's from the Nam. Top Gun. He says that Tom Skerritt's character is based on Duke, but the real thing is that Maverick's father is Duke Mitchell.
Yeah, Duke was his
so Duke was his call sign, so presumably he was somewhat of an inspiration. But Duke doesn't actually appear in the movie. I forgot how to Viper, who was one of Duke's partners in Vietnam, shows up, and there was also a real Vietnam pilot named Viper whose call sign was Viper that presumably that's based on. So that's not quite true, even though he says it's the truth.
Well, would Colbert lie?
Yeah, and he says, just show enough of the movie so that Paramount doesn't sue us, which I assume is just a joke because Viacom and Paramount owns Comedy Central, so I doubt there was any issue.
And they show a second of the movie.
And of course he says that now he knows how Maverick felt when he lost Goose.
Yeah, Colbert does say that he cried every time he sees Top Gun.
And then he says that he blames his district, so he says that California 50th is dead to him, and that now the better known districts, the 434 part series, which it will be for. I do wonder, like, I forgot, like, what would they do if in 2010 they spoke to a member whose district was eliminated? How would they count that as having been done or not?
I don't think. Well, they probably didn't plan on the show going that long.
I don't know, but I mean, they probably would have had to have gone that long to get to all the districts. So.
Yeah, it's more of a running gag, I thought.
Yeah. I mean, they do keep maintaining the big board even into the end, so I imagine they probably had to settle on something. But
I mean, what did they do when they did?
Maybe like if they're, I mean, probably the only time it would really matter is if there are two representatives and both of them could have a claim to be the district. But
yeah, I mean, I think the real point would be get all the districts.
Yeah,
just as many as
or just get 435 or 434.
Yeah,
I mean, he did re-interview some people from the same districts, but yeah.
Next segment.
And so the next. Oh, no, this is like, oh, Duke, you can just keep everything I gave you.
Yeah.
That's what friends do. Give each other inexpensive gifts and expect nothing in return.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then it plays, like, the interview from July where he said that, where apparently, like, he did affirm that he wouldn't run for re-election because of the scandal, but said he was confident they would find him not guilty. Which is very funny. Maybe it was just because he didn't want people, the other members of Congress.
You'd even have to plead not guilty in the first place.
I mean, he did. I think he did, but I think he changed it. But...
Well, he changed his plea to guilty?
I'm not sure, but
you can't change your plea, though, can you?
You can. Like,
you can?
I think, like, unless it's like...
Then what's the point of a plea if you can change it?
I mean, just so, like, you know how to start the trial. Like, if it's guilty, then it's just about how much time you're going to get, I assume.
But then I thought, whatever.
I mean, you could be wrong, but... And I don't know if you point out, like, the one guy with the soul patch behind him. I just wonder what happened to him now. And it says, like, the thing I admire about Duke Cunningham is that he lied, but he lied brazenly. Because he has, to date's word, confidence.
Yep.
And it talks about the Canadian no-confidence vote in the government, which led to an election which the Conservatives won.
What was the no-confidence about?
It was about how, I guess after the Quebec independence referendum almost succeeded, they decided to start running a lot of ads for the federal government in Quebec. And it seems like they were very selective about, like, which ad agencies they gave money to.
Okay.
And so I guess they have to pay $1.1 billion back at the end. I know he says, like, Colbert tells the viewers not to change the channel while they're talking about Canada, but he'll give him something nice at the end. He talks about the $1.1 million paid back, and then he says, hey, that's in Canadian dollars, so that's just chunk change. And he shows a picture of Monopoly money. Mm-hmm. And then it says Duke Cunningham wouldn't wipe his ass with the chump change, and the bullet point is he'd have a defense contractor do it.
Did he mostly get perhaps from defense contractors, actually?
Yeah, it was mostly defense contractors. Okay. And then Colbert says, like, other countries can't keep their government confidence up. It says electile dysfunction. I remember during the 2016 election, our grandmother was sending around a Cheney bill, or that was the whole punchline.
Electile dysfunction?
Yeah. And it talks about how in Japan also had a vote of no confidence in August over what he calls a postal controversy, which was that Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi wanted to privatize the Japan Post despite facing fierce opposition from his party. So they actually did hold a no confidence vote, which led to another election. And it seems like he won pretty decisively, so it didn't work, but...
Okay, why do you want to privatize the mail?
I guess to save money or something.
I assume the mail was not privatized?
Yeah. And it shows a picture of a Pikachu stamp, which I could believe they would have done, but it is not real. The picture is just from the Pokemon Yellow cover. I couldn't tell what the stamp is of, but presumably it's a real stamp.
Yeah.
They talked about how Italy has had 60 governments in the last 60 years.
Italy?
Yeah, which was true at the time.
That's a lot.
Yeah. Although since then there's only been 10 governments, so at least it's better than one government a year.
So why is it so much?
And I said, like, of course, a lot of it is just like when like coalitions changed during the same prime minister.
Ah.
Although since then, it said like not only enrolled in 10 governments, but only one of them was because of a reshuffle. I mean, 9 prime ministers is still a lot, but I mean, a lot of them are repeats. But
if you count every Congress as a new government, how many governments has the U.S. had?
So like probably like 110 to 120, somewhere between that.
And how many in like the last 60 years?
30, because every 2 years.
But even if like there's a special election, or say.
I mean, that doesn't usually result. They don't have in the U.S. We don't have special elections all at the same time.
Okay.
I mean, I guess you could think of some things that changed with governments, like when Kevin McCarthy or John Boehner left, but nobody in the U.S. thinks of it that way. So
it's almost a semantic thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's not how... I know, like, a lot of foreigners do get confused when they talk about the government of the United States did this. But, like, how can the government do something against, like, the will of the parties? But, like, the government doesn't refer to... It usually refers to the executive branch of the U.S. and not the legislative one, so... Which
is different, because... when, like, parliamentary systems, the government are the parties in charge, right?
And then Colbert says that it's the land of the free, the home of the confident, America. And the pilgrims came here with nothing but the shirts on their back, both places, and the buckles on their shoes.
Mm-hmm.
It says they're confident to build a new world with the Indians. The whole point is, or on the Indians.
Yep.
It said, I mean, we have enough confidence to let the government operate even when we have no confidence in it. I mean, have you seen Bush's approval ratings? It says, brag out your magnifying glass.
How low was it at the time?
I should have checked that, but
Very low.
I'll check.
I mean,
George.
Did Bush start becoming unpopular like soon after 2004 election?
Yeah.
So it's just pretty steady decline after that, right? How much of it was Iraq? All of it?
I mean, that's probably a lot of it. I think like probably gas prices didn't help either. Seems like it was around like 40 around that time.
Yeah.
And that's probably about the same as like what Biden's is now, probably a little bit higher, but
it was low given he had reached like 90s.
Yeah, that was just, I mean, that was after
During
9/11. You
well,
probably
yeah.
wouldn't want to say you.
It's 9/11, but
Yeah.
he was on a...
And then they said that like, and Colbert says, what kind of democratic government bends to the will of the people? And I mean, we elected him because he has confidence in him. And it talks about how this is so we have people out of work, the oil prices are through the work, and we entered into a war for questionable reasons. And the people out of work thing doesn't seem that fair because unemployment was still going down at the time, so
yeah,
maybe it was higher than it was in the 90s, but
it was probably a talking point.
Maybe, yeah.
At the time of the episode.
And then he says, I mean, George Bush, he's a man of confidence, says, or a con man. I mean, that is what con stands for.
It's a Melville story.
Oh, yeah.
It's about,
it is.
Technically it's about Ralph Waldo Emerson, but...
And then he says, and then at the end he does thank the Americans for their patience, and he brings out his tree, which is the video of Robosaurus. Struckosaurus seems to be just the Simpsons name for it, but...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So is Robosaurus still in operation?
See, I do remember, like, and I remember when this happened, which is that one time the owner did try to sell it on Pawn Stars. So I imagine it's probably just as much a publicity stunt for the show as for Robosaurus, but...
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the next one is, was it really that bad? The Black Death. And so he starts off bringing up the hot zone again for Richard Preston. The scaremongers are mongering their scare. Today, the monger is like a Germanic word that comes from Latin. Mongo is like the Latin word for...
Is that anything to do with like Mongol or...
No,
Mongol
it doesn't.
No,
I don't think so. Yeah.
Where does the word Mongol come from? Is that what they call themselves? Or?
Oh, I can check that.
Because, I mean, it's not a crazy coincidence, but...
Mongol is what they call themselves.
Yeah.
Mongrel is from Old English gamong, apparently, or yimong is actually pronounced, which means like mingled. It's same root as among.
Okay.
Yeah. And then the next one, he talks about the so-called avian flu. He raises an eyebrow. He says, this one. He does like raising his eyebrow a lot. Yeah. And a lot of people do bring him up for like the whole DreamWorks face meme that started a bit after this. Yeah. And he says, like, you know what, pandemic, see me shake? And then he holds out his hand and says, you could cut a diamond on this. I don't think that's an expression. I mean, maybe it is. But
I feel like you'd be able to cut a diamond if you were shaking, actually.
I don't know.
And you'd get more movement that way. But...
Yeah. And then so he talks about what it was like in the medieval times. He calls an illuminated manuscript the video iPod of the day. What we call like the video iPod was the Apple Vision Pro of the day.
Yeah, iPods are funny because it's like very short lived.
Oh really?
I mean, compared to cell phones.
I mean, yeah, that's true.
As a thing, cell phones have been the hot new technology for a while.
I mean, they were around before the iPod, but
I
mean, you couldn't play music on your cell phone for a while, so apart from the ringtone. But
people can like not stop buying iPhones for a while, and I'm sure that will even become outdated.
Yeah, I know. Like the last iPod was the iPod Touch, which I think they stopped manufacturing sometime around like 2020s.
Yeah. So. Well, I mean, as soon as you're able to start like playing music on your phone, what's the point of an iPod?
Yeah.
Even video ones.
There's also the continent-wide, centuries-long love affair with crossbows and salted meat. It talks about how, like, the bubonic plague caused people to get blackened cysts on their armpits and genitals, which is one of the places you least want those bulbous blackened cysts. Then he mentions the history police, and that he's not going to win any awards for asking if it was really that bad. Because, you know what they say, every motivational speaker says that in China they have the same character for crisis and opportunity, which Colbert cries foul on. It is wrong. Like, actually, the original statement is slightly more true, which is that the word is danger plus opportunity. The real thing is that the word for crisis is it could translate to like danger point. Yeah. And like the point one also can be used to mean opportunity because of like referring to like a point in time.
Well, I'm sure the motivational speakers care.
Yeah. And they point out how it caused less competition for the live people, which is often cited as a outcome of the Black Death. But crops, livestock, tunics, dulcimers to go around. And it created jobs for grave diggers, mass grave diggers for mass grave diggers.
Yeah. And I know there are actually plenty of Black Death sources that mention that like people who are willing to dig graves and engage in funerary processes were paid pretty well.
Yeah.
Like much better than other work was at the time.
Yeah.
But I assume it also is a pretty quick way to end up catching the plague.
But even back then they would have known that, so.
That's why it was compensated so well.
And so I said how it's more effective. We moved on from the more effective methods of the old amulet quackery treatment to bloodletting and banishment. Yeah.
Was bloodletting used during the bubonic plague?
I assume they probably used a little bit because I think that like bloodletting had been on and off.
Because of the plague.
It wasn't new, yeah. Although it is true that like they hadn't started using the plague doctor costumes for it during the Black Death yet. Yeah. I mean, it was for the plague, but it was mainly later outbreaks.
Now, like, is there any use of bloodletting?
I think for, like, if you have, like, actually something bad in your blood, but...
But it feels like for a lot of things, it just make it worse.
I remember one of the XKCD what-ifs is for, like, if you have, like, an overabundance of iron in your blood, they say, this is one of the few things where bloodletting is still the recommended treatment. Yeah. And then he talks about how, like, Europe's social safety net is straining under its population, that if there were 1 billion Europeans, it would be even worse. Well, maybe it would be better if there were more... I don't know, probably not. And it said, like...
It wouldn't just grow unimpeded.
Yeah. It says, there'd be 1 billion Europeans working 26-hour weeks and still all be on strike. And so he starts going on and on about this long personal story about going from Milan to Basel. Yeah. He says he's supposed to just go through there to Lyon because he said but now he was regretting it because there's so many cathedrals and now it's this stained glass blob. Then he met the only girl with a corkscrew in the next cabin. Yeah. And he said he was sure something was going to happen with her, but the roommate wouldn't leave him alone.
So it's just a fun tangent about the train strike in Europe. How many train strikes were there in Europe? Like, have there been in Europe? Is it like, was it happening at the time, or is it just a fun stereotype?
I mean, it seems like there's one going on right now, so probably it is a
common
real thing. Yeah.
Does that make it hard to travel?
Maybe sometimes, I guess. And so then it talks about how the plague helped philosophy, and the tragedy led to hard questions, among one of which is why his roommate didn't leave. Yeah. And it talks about how it's a glass half full of pestilent sores. Whatever doesn't kill 2/3 of us makes us stronger.
Yeah. Is the Black Death the most, like, in terms of percentage, deadliest plague?
Maybe, probably.
Ever?
Oh, maybe probably in, like, isolated places, or, like, imagine, like, in the Americas, probably more than 1/3 of people
epidemic.
died.
Most dangerous, like, epidemic ever, then, in terms of percentage of the population. Or even the ones in the Americas would be more so.
I think they probably would be. I think, even though it's hard to get an exact estimate, although maybe that was over such a long period of time, it might not be a totally fair comparison. Like, I know the Black Death is often considered to be one of the few times the world population might have actually gone down. Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah. And
what percentage did it kill outside of Europe, like Middle East and Asia?
Probably a lot, too. So now we get a guest, Richard Preston, who is just a writer. It seems like he writes both fiction and fact-based books. Yeah. About, like, epidemiology. Yeah. And so his first thing before going down to talk about how, if germs are too small to see, how bad can they be? Much lower. So he says... And so he asks him if he's Mr. or Doctor. He says you should just call him Mr. He says he does have an English PhD, but that's not relevant here. Yeah. I mean, honestly, it does feel kind of interesting. I mean, to be fair, reporters do it all the time. It is kind of interesting. Somebody that wasn't even really like an epidemiologist wrote like the most read book about Ebola, I guess. I definitely recognize the cover of the Hot Zone, so I'm sure it was.
Well, he must have done a lot of research, right?
I assume he did research.
His career afterwards.
Yeah, I mean, even then, I imagine there's still like a lot of like people that aren't academics that appoint themselves experts that aren't really the best. Like with Jared Diamond and Guns, Germs, and Steel. Like I think he's like he's a geographer at least.
He's a biologist.
Yeah, a biologist. Yeah. But I know, like, even though, like, publishing houses, of course, like, I know, like, a lot of historians never took it very seriously, so.
Well, yeah, because he wasn't a historian.
Yeah.
So it seems like, from what I understand, mostly wrote about fiction, or at least.
Yeah.
And then I'd imagine he did a lot of probably, like, journalistic work, which
maybe
are mostly English degrees anyway.
And so he says, like, so he can't treat him for any of the diseases, especially the ones he didn't study. And so he talks about his book titles Hot Zone, Demon in the Freezer is one of his somewhat newer ones. Yeah. They say it sounds like Ken Follett novels, who Ken Follett is a Welsh thriller author. In 2004, he actually did write a book called Whiteout where the plot was about a virus theft, so I assume that's why they picked him in particular.
Yeah. So, I mean, he talks about the dangers of like biowarfare. And...
Yeah. It says, scared the pants off of me is what is his challenge. And so and Richard Preston calls his expertise dark biology, which does put something like a term that somebody that's not an expert would make on.
Well, yeah, he's not an expert.
Yeah.
I mean, so he admits he's not an expert, I feel.
Although, I mean, he does know more than a...
Yeah.
And so, I mean, well, not an expert, like not like a serious...
Yeah.
And so he says, Colbert asks him about smallpox. He says, I mean, I know it's pox and it's very tiny, but... And then he brings up how after smallpox's eradication, they saved like a few samples in freezers of various research institutions. And then, like Colbert said, was that because it was like some sort of prank?
Why do we have them saved?
I mean, imagine like if we want to do any further research on him, it'll be helpful.
Yeah.
And maybe if we could somehow make like an easier smallpox vaccine or something.
Yeah.
I mean, they do still use smallpox vaccines. I know, like for monkeypox, they started giving people smallpox vaccines. I mean, they have stopped giving them out after it was eradicated. So.
Was there great pox?
I think there is. There is a great pox too.
Yeah, so
I'll look up what that's called nowadays.
Has it been eradicated, or?
Seems like the great pox at one time was used to refer to syphilis, but I'm not sure if that was the original one.
So, did they talk about the biowarfare?
He talks about smallpox usually kills a third of people. Then he talks about there's also the extreme smallpox. Colbert said, not your Wednesday afternoon smallpox, which is hemorrhagic smallpox.
Yeah.
It's not a different virus, but it is just like a particularly severe thing you can get.
It sounded very nasty.
It seems like only adults get them. It points out what happens is that like every part of your body starts bleeding, your skin peels off.
How long can you live?
I don't think that long. Your eye turns black. I think it might be theoretically possible to survive, but they call it billiard ball eyes. It says, you bleed from all orifices. And then Colbert says, when you were a child, do you dream of terrifying people?
Yeah.
And then he talks about like how like you're tested to expel a tubular cast because their linings come off too. Was that your like Oldfield songs or into Tubular Bells, the theme from The Exorcist by Mike Oldfield is the joke with that. And it says, those are some of the things to look for, and Richard Preston's word, the doctors wouldn't know what they were looking at. I mean, they might crack open a book. And to be fair, that doesn't seem like it would be that hard to find, they said. But to be fair, like, probably it would be a serious risk for the doctors to know they were dealing with smallpox and it might spread it. But
yeah.
Although I do kind of feel like the smallpox samples getting out would make news, and if they worked at like the virology lab, they would obviously know that immediately.
Yeah, they do have vaccines.
Yeah, but I mean that's not useful after you get it.
Yeah,
and then smallpox is probably just like one of like the most fortunate diseases in that it only affects humans. It doesn't mutate very fast, and and pretty much everybody that survives it gets immunity to it. So it's pretty easy to develop a vaccine for.
Yep, I mean that's why it was done quick, right?
Yeah, and so he asks if like avian flu is a big deal, and he talks about how it's not a big deal yet because it hasn't spread to humans.
Did it ever spread to humans?
I mean, there have been. I mean, most flu things do spread from like birds or pigs, but like the avian flu epidemic they were worried about was still just going around birds. I think.
Yeah, how many birds did it end up killing?
I'm not sure, but and it says like he doesn't know what species of. They say they don't know what species of bird is ultimately responsible. So he asks not eagles, I guess, to protect America, and says it's not eagles.
Yeah.
So he says, like, he bets that it'll come from China and points out that you can't bet on it on the agricultural futures market.
Yeah. I assume you can bet on anything, right, in Vegas?
Maybe. But, I mean, there is at least a market. I mean, the futures market isn't gambling.
Yeah, I know. I mean, but, like, actual gambling on it.
Yeah. Now remembering that one fact there is specifically a law against trading in onion futures because somebody, like, pulled off a particularly, like, big, like, scheme involving it.
Well, I guess that's...
Like, I think, like, he bought, like, most of the onions in Chicago to make it work or something.
Well, that's,
yeah.
Guess we learned our lesson as a society. Yeah. Was it
and so he says, like...
possible with onions?
I'm not sure. And so Colbert asks if they can inoculate people against avian flu, and he points out that, I mean, one, there wouldn't be enough vaccines, and it wouldn't be useful unless we knew which kind of avian flu was going around.
Yeah.
Then he asks him if he's worried if Dutch elm disease is going to spread to humans. Dutch elm disease is a fungus. I mean, I guess it's...
Has there been any
fungus.
tree diseases that have spread to humans?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't make sense, but it's worth asking, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a fungus, although there's beetles that help spread it. And so that's the end, and, like, that was the last segment until, like, the lead-off segment is called The Duke's Things, and it shows pictures of everything that he got confiscated from him with sad music.
Furniture.
Yeah, the house. I always saw, like, something about, like, an interview with the person that currently owns the Dukester, although it's renamed.
What's it renamed to?
I forget. So that's a good episode of it?
Yeah.
Signing off.